Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. President. I use the right to reply in light of the statement made by the representative of the United States. Once again, with old and new pretexts, the government of the U.S. is trying to in vain justify a policy which is illegal and morally unsustainable, even when, in an overwhelming way, the General Assembly has confirmed over more than 3 decades an unequivocal message that the international community recognizes the urgency of putting an end to the economic and commercial embargo against Cuba. The USA is imposing the most serious siege and with the greatest impact in terms of the coercive measures undertaken against Cuba. What was announced in May 2022 with regard to visas, remittances, and travel to Cuba does not change the principal measures that enhance the blockade and which have caused a severe worsening in the living conditions of the Cuban people since 2019 till today. The speech of the United States is hypocritical and dishonest. The criminal, economic, commercial, and financial embargo against the people of Cuba is a cruel violation which is massive and been on over a long time and cannot be justified in any way, even with the lies and the calumnies and the legends that the White House and the State Department seeks to use to justify its measures. For several thousands of children over 18 years, they have been injured or harmed by measures by the U.S., and there have been several hundred shootings in schools since 1970. The systemic racism in that country, the police brutality, the repressive policy against migrants, and the repression of the reproductive rights and extrajudicial executions and the use of torture are just some of the condemned practices committed in the United States and which are a scandal to the whole world. The United States' complicity with the massive assassination of citizens in Gaza at the hand of the IDF means that it is participating in a crime against humanity. Mr. President, the U.S. delegation cites inflated figures with regard to humanitarian aid to our country, and it talks about multi-million funds that the United Agency for International Development is sending for subversion in Cuba, and which are used to for Cuban immigrants and the beneficiaries. This is all just making many obstacles to the delivery of support from NGOs. It's totally false that the United States is providing medicine to Cuba. There is irrefutable proof that the blockade prevented the official channels for sending aid to the country, including from third countries, in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. The restrictions for the export of medicines to Cuba are explicitly covered by laws, and this is an arm of aggression, a weapon of aggression against our country. The U.S. says that it advocates individual freedoms and supports the private sector in Cuba, but it has not lifted restrictions which damage the interests of the Cuban businessmen. If the U.S. is really interested in the well-being of the human rights and the self-determination of the Cuban people, they could lift the blockade. They would work together in cooperation internationally rather than discrediting us, and remove us from the list of so-called state sponsors of terrorism. Cuba should never have been on this list, and we several weeks ago expressed our position. This was expressed by our Cuban president, and he said, quote, "Cuba will continue to defend its democracy and its socialist model, which has over decades demonstrated what a developing country can do, a small country and with small natural resources. We will continue our transformative efforts to find a way out from the embargo in place by U.S. imperialism and means to achieve prosperity with justice, social justice that our people deserve." Thank you very much.